The sun was coming through the lace curtains just right, casting those soft little patterns across the wood. I was mid-polish, wiping down the top of the piano like I'd done 1,000 times before. The lemon oil clung to my hands, and the cloth moved slow and steady. It was a habit, muscle memory, a kind of morning prayer. And then it hit me. The stillness. It wasn't the peaceful kind. It was heavier than that. Thick, like the house had paused, waiting for something to land. My hand stopped moving. The cloth slipped from between my fingers, floated a bit, and fell onto the warm floor with a hush. But my heart had already dropped. I turned, slow. The room didn't feel right. Nothing had moved, but everything felt off. The kind of quiet you don't trust. I stood there, breathing in the dust and the lemon, trying to remember what felt different. Then I saw the corner. It should have been a dark outline beneath the sun, a shape carved into the morning. But it was just space, just rug, bare. My feet moved before I could stop them. I crossed the room in silence, each step echoing just enough to make me ache. The spot where the piano had always lived, where it anchored the whole house, was hollow, just a faded rectangle where the rug had grown old beneath its legs. I dropped to my knees. My hand hovered, then lowered, pressing into that worn mark, like I was checking a scar. It was cold. I pressed harder, waiting for warmth that never came. Even the dust felt confused, like it hadn't settled in yet. I stayed there a long time, on my knees, staring at a corner that had forgotten how to hold a heartbeat. I didn't say his name. Not yet. I just listened. Not for sound, for absence. No. Creak of the bench. No hush of strings waiting to be touched. No hum in the air. Even the birds outside hesitated, their song caught somewhere between the branches. The whole house held its breath with me. I turned toward the living room. Nothing stirred. The shadows on the wall stretched long and thin, like they were trying to reach for something too. And that's when I knew. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't tuning or moving or repairing. It was gone. And I didn't know what part of me had gone with it yet. But I could feel the hollow already blooming. I walked through the rest of the room like it might still be hiding in there somewhere. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I'd find it covered up or waiting for me, just out of sight. My eyes landed on the spot where I used to keep the metronome, where Charles once dropped his tie on Christmas Eve because he couldn't wait to dance. But everything was still. Everything was clean. Too clean. I closed my eyes and tried to hear it, anything. The last note, the last song. I couldn't remember it. Did I play something last night? Was it the lullaby Daddy taught me? Or the hymn I always hummed when the stew simmered and the boys tumbled in from school? I tried to pull the sound forward, like tugging a string through a needle, but it slipped from me. Just a frayed feeling, a shape with no sound. I sat on the floor, my back to the wall, hands resting in my lap where they didn't quite know what to do anymore. The air still smelled like lemon oil and the fading lilacs from the vase on the table. But without the music, everything else felt like a stage after the curtain drops. That's when the memories came, uninvited. Daddy's hand over mine, steady, sure, guiding me through that first piece, telling me to listen harder than I play. Charles smiled wide as I played our wedding song, whispering that I made it sound like silk, the boys twirling in mismatched pajamas while I clumsily fumbled through Ragtime Joe, pretending not to mess up on purpose, just to make them laugh a la. It lived there, in those keys, in that wood, in that corner, and now it is gone, but not from me. I pressed my palm against the floor again, still cold. But inside, something glowed, a little. Not with joy, not yet, but with memory, with proof. Because even when something is taken, it can't. Always take the music with it. Not if it lived in your bones. Not if it hummed in your chest like a second heartbeat. That's when it hit me. Really hit me. He sold it. Not misplaced. Not borrowed. Not stored away to surprise me with something better. He sold it. My throat tightened, and the air felt like it didn't belong to me anymore. He'd sold it without a word, without asking, without even telling me after the fact, and it wasn't theft. Theft would have meant he knew it was mine. This was dismissal, a decision made without my voice. I stood up slowly, my knees aching from the floor. My fingers brushed against the old waxed edge of the bench leg still tucked under the table. A ghost, maybe, or just a piece he forgot to move. The air around me felt blue. Evening had started to creep through the windows, drawing soft shadows over the wall like ink spreading in water. A bird called once in the distance, but nothing answered. The scent of the piano wax still lingered, faintly in the air, just enough to taunt. I turned to the doorway. The house didn't ask questions. Neither did I. But inside, something folded in, a page torn right from the middle of my story, and I didn't know how to write the next part without a melody to guide me. It was a late summer afternoon, the kind where the cicadas hum like they're singing to themselves. I still had dish soap on my knuckles from drying the plates, and honeysuckle tangled in my braid from running around the fence earlier. Daddy had just finished tuning the piano. It was the old Baldwin upright, the one that smelled like warm wood and patience. He patted the bench. "Come here, baby girl." I wiped my hands on my dress and climbed up, legs too short to touch the floor. The bench was cool under my thighs, and the breeze coming in from the kitchen window carried the smell of cornbread and wildflowers. He rested his hand gently over mine. "This one's middle C," he whispered, like he was telling me something. Sacred. I pressed it. A single note, clean and honest, filled the room. I smiled without meaning to. It sounded like something opening. "Again," he said. And I did, over and over, until it wasn't just a sound, it was a place. A place I knew I could come back to, no matter how many years passed. It was home, tucked inside a note. Daddy nodded, quiet. That's it. And I knew, even then, I wasn't just learning music. I was learning by myself. I'd sit cross-legged on that rug for hours, the scratchy kind with fading flowers around the border. My school notebooks were always nearby, half filled with spelling lists and the other half with my music, my little fireflies. That's what they felt like. Every tune I caught felt like one glowing thing I didn't want to lose. The house was always noisy. My brothers yelling over the TV, the dog barking at every squirrel that dared past the window, Mama hollering for someone to bring, in the laundry. But the piano made it all quiet. When I sat down and touched those keys, the noise faded, like someone dimmed the world. Sometimes I'd just play with the soft pedal pressed, so everything sounded like a whisper. Other times, I'd close my eyes and make up songs that nobody else knew. I'd scribble the notes in the margins of my homework and give them names like Rain at Recess or Grandma's Peppermint Tea. I wasn't just playing, I was building a world. That piano was never furniture, it was a doorway, and once I stepped through, I didn't want to come back out. The church smelled like beeswax and hymnals, the kind of scent that stuck to your dress long after you left. My lace collar itched something awful, and my knees knocked a little under the piano bench, but I kept my back straight and my fingers steady. The lights were warm overhead, soft golden beams catching the dust in the air like little halos floating. Around, I began to play. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. I focused on the notes, let them carry me through the nerves. Then, somewhere in the middle of the song, I looked up and saw him, Charles. He wasn't clapping like the others. He wasn't even moving. Just sitting there, hands folded, eyes fixed. On me like he was hearing something nobody else could, and in that stillness, something shifted. I played smoother after that. calmer, like my fingers weren't scared anymore. Afterwards, when everyone clapped, he didn't stand. He just nodded once, slow and sure. I don't know how, but I knew that boy would be part of my song someday. We didn't have much, just vows under an oak tree, fried chicken from Aunt Rita, and a punch bowl that tasted more like melted popsicles than anything fancy. But it was ours. I'd written the waltz myself, simple, sweet. I'd practiced for weeks until my fingers could dance through it with my eyes closed. The barn was strung with fairy lights that swayed when the breeze blew in. The scent of hay and fried food lingered thick in the air, but no one seemed to mind. People laughed, spun, clapped off beat. Charles came to me, held out his hand. "Are you ready?" he asked. "I was born ready," I smiled, slipping my hand into his. We danced, slow, close. My head tucked beneath his chin, his hand warm on my back. The piano notes wrapped around us like ribbon, and I remember thinking, this is what forever sounds like. Not big, not loud, just steady, just ours. Boxes lined the walls like silent witnesses, but we hadn't touched them yet. Before the dishes, before the curtains, before the couch, he wheeled in the grand piano, carefully, like it was something living. Sweat glistened at his brow as he stepped back, hands on his hips, proud. "It's part of us," he said, nodding. "So it's part of this." I didn't answer right away. I just sat down, lifted the lid, and played a simple scale. The sound echoed a little. Bare walls do that. But even in its echo, it felt right. I turned toward him and smiled. He just winked. At that moment, the house wasn't empty anymore. We were building something sound could live in. That piano saw everything. Birthday cakes that came out burnt, but got eaten anyway. Late night crying after Mama passed. When Charles just sat beside me without needing to speak. The boys were shouting their lines from school plays while I plunked out their cue notes. Even Sunday, Charles brought home a floppy-eared puppy instead of a new water heater like he promised. I was mad, but I played "How Much Is That Doggy" that night, and we both laughed till we cried. Some days I played like the sun had settled into my chest. Other days, I just touched the keys to remind myself something still made sense. The world spun loud, messy, unpredictable. But that piano? It held its tune, even when I didn't. Lately, the porch creaked more than usual. I'd hear him step outside, mumbling into his phone, his voice low, clipped. The light out there flickered, always a beat behind him. I started noticing how his shoes moved at night, hurried, like he had somewhere else to be, even when he didn't. One night I asked, soft from the kitchen, "Everything all right?" He smiled too quickly. "Yeah, just work stuff. You worry too much." I didn't push. I just nodded and went back to stirring the soup. But the music in me changed. I kept playing, but quieter, as if maybe, just maybe, if the notes turned gentle. Enough, he'd stop long enough to hear what I couldn't say. The kettle hissed behind me one night, rosemary in the air, steam fogging up the window. The piano sat in the corner, half closed, like it was tired of waiting too. I should have asked again. But some songs, they end before you realize you've reached the final verse. The morning started soft, the kind of softness that tricks you. The daffodils had opened along the walkway, bright and cheerful, like they didn't know anything could go wrong. I stood at the window with my tea, watching them sway in the breeze. The air smelled of cut grass and warming earth, and for a second, I let myself believe the day would stay gentle. "Don't forget the list," I called as Charles grabbed his keys. "Got it," he said, waving the folded paper in the air. Back in a bit. The door closed with its usual creak. I turned back to the sink, rinsing dishes while the breeze drifted in through the open window. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. The house hummed with its usual morning rhythm. Nothing. felt out of place. And yet, something tugged at me. It wasn't a noise or a shadow. It was just a feeling, the kind that settles low in your belly, quiet and certain. The sunlight streaming in felt too soft, like it was trying to comfort me before. I even understood why. I dried my hands and walked into the front room, sheet music under my arm, already thinking about what to play first. But I hadn't made it halfway across the floor before my steps slowed. Something was wrong. I didn't know what yet, but I felt something had shifted, and the daffodils, bright and unbothered, kept swaying outside, as if the world hadn't just changed. I walked into the room expecting a note, maybe something left half-played from the night before. Instead, there was only light and space, the kind of space that feels loud. I stopped in the doorway, not moving, not breathing. My eyes went straight to the corner, that corner, the one that held my piano like a secret. And it was empty. The rug still had its faded dent, 4 soft marks where the legs used to rest, a little darker in color, a little deeper in memory. But Baldwin was gone, just gone. I tightened my grip on the sheet music I was holding. My hands didn't know what to do now. The pages crinkled slightly, too loud in that strange new silence. I stepped forward, slow, like I was walking across a place I didn't recognize anymore. I stood in that corner and looked down, half expecting the piano to reappear if I closed my eyes and opened them again. It didn't. I crouched down, touched the spot where the pedals had rested. The floor felt cold, not chilled, just wrong. My fingers lingered on the edge of the rug like maybe the past could still be pulled back into the present. I remember whispering, "No," not loud, not panicking, just a small word from a stunned heart. Everything else was still the same. Curtains open, dust dancing in the light, the same clock ticking gently on the wall. And yet, the room had a hole in it now, a hole shaped like music. I stood up slowly, afraid to breathe too deeply. Because I already knew what this meant. I just didn't want to say it yet. I reached for my phone with fingers that shook more than I'd admit. I dialed, voicemail. I hung up, called again. Still nothing. My thumb hovered over the message icon, then tapped. "Where are you?" I typed. "Did you move the piano?" The sigh. Little bubble blinked once. Then it disappeared. Nothing followed. I stared at the screen, my reflection dim in the glass. My chest felt tight, like I'd been running, though I hadn't moved. I listened hard, for the sound of his car in the driveway, the back door creaking open, the shuffle of his boots on the porch. But the house gave me nothing. Not even the fridge's usual hum seemed steady. I began pacing. The hallway felt longer than usual, every step echoing louder than the last. I stopped and leaned against the wall, phone still clutched like it might save me. "Come on," I whispered. "Just answer." The birds outside chirped, as if nothing had happened. I closed my eyes and pressed the phone to my forehead. Please let this be a mistake. Please let it still be somewhere. Please. But the silence that answered me didn't care. The front door creaked open the same way it always did. I was still standing by the hallway, heart thudding, but face calm. Charles walked in carrying a brown paper sack, the kind with oranges and cereal and whatever coupons told him to buy. He looked up, surprised. "Oh, hey," he said casually, as if I hadn't called 3 times. I swallowed. "Where's the piano?" He blinked, set the bag down on the table. "What?" "The piano, Charles." He scratched the back of his neck, glancing toward the front room. "Oh, I sold it." Just like that, like he'd returned library books. "You sold it?" "Yeah," he said, shrugging. We needed the space and the money. My throat tightened. I couldn't move. He walked to the fridge, pulling out the milk like it was any other afternoon. I started, but the words got tangled. My piano, my father's hands, my lullabies gone, and all he did was shrug. It was the shrug that broke me, not the words. Not even the sail, that lift of his shoulders, like it was no big deal, like I was no big deal. I just stood there staring while he fumbled with a cereal box. "You barely played it anymore," he said, still not looking at me. I didn't answer. Not because I had nothing to say, but because everything I needed to say had just been shoved off a cliff. That tiny gesture, half-second, thoughtless, told me everything I hadn't wanted to believe. He didn't see me anymore. I wasn't angry. Wasn't even shocked. I was just still. And in that stillness, something ended, not loudly, just completely. I walked back into the front room alone. The light had shifted, longer now, softer. It stretched across the floor like it was reaching for something that wasn't there. Sank into the armchair near the window and stared at the empty space where the piano had always lived. Not the rug, not the wall behind it. That space. He said I didn't play anymore. But I did. Quietly. When no one was listening. When my hands needed to move, but my heart didn't have words, he stopped hearing it. Long before I stopped playing, I sat there, knees pulled to my chest, and listened to the house. It sounded wrong, the kind of wrong that isn't loud, but permanent. Used to fill this space with music. Now, it was filled with a silence I didn't ask for. And the worst part, he didn't notice the difference. The mornings didn't go quiet. They went hollow. It was the sound of nothing echoing in rooms that used to hold music. I'd walk into the kitchen and hear the creak of the chair, the click of the fridge. But not the hum I used to hum without thinking. Not the warm little notes I'd play before breakfast. Not even the low rhythm of keys pressed just to keep my hands from feeling useless. Now it was Charles, talking over the news anchor, flipping through static and touchdowns. I stood in the hallway one morning, coffee in hand, staring at the back of his head. "Morning," I said softly. He muttered, not turning. The coffee smelled burnt. The air felt thick. I looked at the corner where the piano had once lived. The rug still hadn't fully flattened. He turned up the volume, and I took another sip of silence. He used to dance with me, right there in the kitchen, under that flickering light. His hands dusted with flour, his laughter low and lazy. Some nights, we'd waltz in socks with soup boiling on the stove. His thumb brushed the back of my neck like he never wanted to let go. Now I stood in the hallway, just watching him. He sat hunched on the couch, remote in hand, flipping channels like they owed him something. The TV glowed blue on his face. He didn't even glance my way. I spoke gently. "You want some tea?" "No, I'm good," he said, eyes still on the screen. The couch sagged beneath him, worn from years. So was I. I stepped back, the floor creaking beneath me. He didn't notice, and that somehow hurt more than if he'd said something cruel. "It was just a thing," he said. I had asked why he didn't tell me first, about the piano. Why did he'd sold it like it was an old lamp we no longer needed? His words came out casually. Dismissive, just a thing. My stomach tightened. I looked at him across the kitchen, light slanting through the blinds in thin, tired lines. "That piano," I whispered, "held lullabies and vows and Sunday mornings." He didn't respond. Just popped the toaster again, like we were still talking about appliances. I stared down at my coffee cup. The rim was chipped. I hadn't noticed that before. "It mattered to me," I said, quieter now. Still nothing. I felt something fold in on itself, like a note pressed too hard into paper. We slept on the same mattress, but it might as well have been two boats drifting on different water. He breathed heavily and even turned toward the wall. I stared at his back, the curve of his spine outlined by the moonlight spilling in through the blinds. I counted our breaths. High, mine, and the ones between. I reached for the edge of the sheet, smoothing it with my fingers just to have something to touch. The plaster on the ceiling had a crack shaped like a bird. I traced it with my eyes until they burned. He shifted, the mattress groaning faintly. But he didn't reach for me, and I didn't move. We used to talk before going to sleep. Whisper plans, laugh under the covers. Now I held the quiet like it was all I had left. The gym smelled like floor wax and nerves. My fingers were trembling. I could see Mama's shoes just behind the curtain, her hand giving me one last little squeeze before the fabric fell closed. "Play it like you're praying," she whispered. So I did. Middle C rang out first, steady, like a heartbeat. Then came the rest, gentle and halting, my feet barely reaching the pedals. I remember the lights above me, hot on my shoulders, dust catching in their glow like magic. I remember the hush of the crowd, the creak of the bench, my own breath, and the sound. Soft and imperfect, but mine. The old house was quiet that afternoon, the kind of quiet that comes before something begins. I sat on the piano bench, belly full and heavy with the baby, my back aching. Charles leaned against the doorway, arms folded, smiling. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded and pressed the first notes of Brahms with fingers that felt swollen and slow. He walked over, sat beside me, and placed his hand on my belly. The baby kicked. Charles chuckled. "You've got rhythm already, little one," he hummed the melody under his breath, in time with my hands. We were a song then, all three of us. I didn't forget that. I heard his voice through the garage wall. Low, private. I paused, holding a basket of laundry, and leaned in. "I did it, okay?" he said. The woman paid cash. A long pause, then laughter. "No, she doesn't know. Not yet." I stopped breathing. The wall between us felt thinner than ever, but his voice, his words, felt like a canyon. I stepped back, slow. My hand gripped. The laundry tighter. Not in anger, in grief. Because it wasn't just the piano anymore. It was him, and the space he'd already stepped into without me. The rain hit the window hard, like it was trying to get in. It rattled the glass in waves, fierce and messy, but I barely flinched. I was standing at the sink, peeling carrots for a stew that no one asked for and no one would thank me for. The kitchen smelled like roots and wet wood. Dim light from the window stretched long across the counter and the ticking clock above the stove was barely louder than the thunder. I glanced toward the living room. Charles was there, same as always, remote in hand, eyes fixed on the television. Sports highlights flickered across his face like ghosts of someone else's life. Another crash of thunder shook the windows. I turned back to the carrots. The peels piled up slowly, silent. He didn't look up. Not once. I stood there, holding that dull little paring knife, listening to the world scream outside and wondering how a man could be so unaffected. How could everything rage like this and he just sit? The storm outside was loud, but the silence inside, that was louder. The knife slipped. Just a little. Just enough. I felt the sting before I saw it. A red line bloomed across my finger, bright against the orange carrot and the old cutting board. It wasn't deep, but it was fast, like the body knew something the heart hadn't spoken out loud yet. I stared at it. Not in pain, in recognition. It was like something inside me had surfaced for a moment, just long enough to say, "See, this is what it feels like." The pot behind me hisses with steam, forgotten and overboiling. The smell of onions and old soap hung thick in the air. I grabbed a dish towel and pressed it to my hand, the fabric quickly soaking. "Charles," I called, but not loud. Nothing. The TV murmured from the other room. His laugh came, short and flat, like he didn't know what was happening in the next room, or didn't care. I wrapped the towel tighter. He didn't ask. And that hurt more than the slice ever could. I opened the back door and stepped out, barefoot, not in defiance, not in strength, in surrender. The rain was steady, cold, and constant. It hit my face like a welcome, like something that saw me when everything else didn't. I walked down the garden path, toes sinking into the mud with every slow step. The smell of wet lilacs drifted in the air. The trees rustled, heavy with water. Like even they had secrets they couldn't hold anymore. The wind caught the edge of my sweater. I didn't fix it. I tilted my face to the sky, eyes closed, rain slipping down my cheeks. It didn't matter if they were tears or not. Everything was soft and soaking. I kept walking, toward nothing and everything, until the world around me felt quiet enough to hold me. I remember thinking, this is the only thing that sees me now. Not him, not the house, just the rain, the shed. Was older than everything else on the property. I hadn't been inside in years. My fingers fumbled with the rusted latch, cold and stubborn under the weight of water. The hinges groaned as I pushed the door open, the smell of soil and mildew greeting me like a memory I hadn't meant to stir. Inside, it was dim. Cobwebs hung thick across the rafters. The floor creaked, soft with rot in places, but familiar. Knew exactly where to go. Behind an old rake and a coil of hose, under a faded tarp, was the box. My box. I pulled it out, knees in the dust, breath shallow. When I opened the lid, the scent hit me. Lavender, old sachets Mama used to make. And beneath, pages, yellowed and soft. My sheet music. Scribbled lines and pencil notes from another lifetime. I ran my fingers over the top page like it was skin I missed. It was like finding a version of myself I'd almost forgotten. But who still remembered me? Each page I lifted brought something. Back a song I'd written when I was newly married. Another from when I was expecting, just a lullaby in 3 slow chords. One I'd copied from memory, a tune Mama used to hum while folding towels, soft and slow. The paper smelled like thyme and lavender. I held them in my lap as the rain softened outside. The shed was quiet, except for the sound of my breathing, which came out broken and uneven. I cried, not the kind of crying you see in movies. No clutching of chests, no dramatic sobs, just tears, the kind that falls without warning, the kind that sit in your throat for weeks before they finally spill. I cried with the music in my hands, with the scent of who I used to be still clinging to every corner of the shed. I didn't want comfort. I just wanted to unravel. And I did. The lightning split the sky in 2. A long, bright fork of light tore through the darkness outside the shed, casting shadows across the walls like old film. Reels. Then the thunder followed, deep and rolling, like it had something to say and didn't care who heard. I didn't flinch. It felt honest, like it belonged. Inside me, something cracked too. Not fast, but clear. I looked down at the stack of sheet, music in my lap, damp around the edges. I touched a corner of one page, and it tore under my fingertip. I didn't stop. Another bolt lit up the sky. I watched it from the crack in the shed door. The thunder rolled again, and I heard it for what? It was not rage, not noise, grief. That's when I finally said it, out loud. He didn't just sell the piano. He sold the part of me that knew how to speak without words. And I didn't know if I'd ever get that voice back. The library smelled like paper and patience. I moved slowly, fingers grazing the spines of books like they were old friends I hadn't visited in years. The light from the tall windows fell in quiet strips across the wooden floor, and every step I took creaked gently. Soft reminders that even stillness had a voice. No one raised their voice. No one hurried. It felt sacred, untouched. The shelves stood tall, unbothered by time or neglect. They held stories that had outlasted chaos, pages that had survived hands and hearts far more worn than mine. And as I stood among them, I thought, maybe something in me had survived too. The sound came from the children's section, soft, unsure, tiny fingers pressing toy keys, clumsy and curious. I followed the sound, heart tugging me closer like it recognized something I didn't. A little girl sat cross-legged in front of a display, keyboard, tongue poking out in concentration. She tapped a random note, then another. No rhythm, no plan, just joy. "Try this one," I said gently, kneeling beside her. I pressed her small finger onto C major. She played it, and then again. She looked up at me, eyes wide. "That sounds like sunshine," she whispered. I smiled, and for the first time in weeks, something warm bloomed in my chest. I hadn't played in so long, but at that moment, I didn't need to. I was listening to music again. Her mother appeared with a surprised smile. "You teach music?" she asked. "I used to," I said softly, brushing dust from my sleeve. She looked at her daughter, still tapping keys, and then back at me. "You still can." That was all. Just those 3 words. And yet they followed me home, clung to me, like notes I couldn't quite place but couldn't forget either. Later that evening, I sat at the kitchen table, tea going cold beside me. The breeze drifted through the window, warm and kind, and her words looped in my head like a melody I hadn't hummed in years. "You still can, and maybe I could." I found them tucked between old sheet music and a lemon bar recipe I never finished. My flyers, Mrs. Evelyn Rose, beginner piano lessons. The paper was yellowed at the edges, but my name was still bold and sure. I stared at it for a while, then I opened my iPad, redesigned it, modern fonts, soft blues, just like that. My fingers shook a little, but I didn't stop. Not even when I hit send on 3 emails to mothers I'd once met at choir or the library bulletin board. I watched the screen for a while after, waiting. By bedtime, no reply. But I felt something new settle in my chest. Not hope. Not yet, but purpose. Opened the front door and paused. The sun warmed the porch, painting the steps in honey-colored light. And there, sitting cross-legged beside the flower pot, was one of my students, small, determined, tapping notes on the practice keyboard I'd placed outside. Simple scales, a little wobbly, but honestly, the music didn't come from me this time. But it filled the air anyway. I leaned against the doorway, arms folded, heart still. The silence was gone, and in its place, something new was beginning. Something I hadn't known I'd been waiting for. Charles walked in from the garage just as I was gathering music sheets off the table. He stepped over a little pink backpack near the dining room archway. One of the girls had forgotten it after her lesson. He paused mid-step, his foot hanging in the air like he wasn't sure where to land. I watched from the kitchen doorway. The room had changed. Music stands were set up near the windows, the afternoon sun bouncing off their silver edges. Folding chairs hugged the table in a half circle. Sheet music spilled gently across a long plastic bin. Crayons rolled lazily toward the corner of the rug. The keyboard sat where our old fruit bowl used to be. He blinked. "What's all this?" he asked. "Students," I said simply, stacking a few loose pages. The scent of pencil shavings and warm paper hung in the air, soft but certain. "Here?" "Yes." He looked around, like he expected the furniture to speak up for him. "I just wasn't expecting this." I nodded. "I know." He bent to pick up the backpack, then thought better of it, letting it be. I didn't rush to explain, because for once, the house was full of something that didn't need translation. It was full of music again. Not ours. Mine. He looked confused. A little lost. Like the walls had shifted just enough to make him question where he stood. "I just thought," he started. We needed the space. I didn't move. I didn't sign. I just looked him in the eye. No, I said. You needed the space. The silence stretched long but not uncomfortable. Just honest. He opened his mouth like he might explain himself, like maybe this time he'd find the right words. But he didn't. Instead, he nodded once. Slow. Almost like he was hearing something for the first time. I didn't raise my voice. I just didn't step back. The lawyer's office was bright and still. Clean lines, light leather chairs, and the faintest scent of lemon polish and toner. I placed the folder on the table, my spreadsheets, budgets, saved letters, and deeds. Years of quiet preparation in neatly labeled tabs. He smiled at me gently. You're very organized. I've had time, I said. We moved through the papers. My retirement. The land in Mississippi my father left me. The old account Charles never remembered to ask about. It wasn't spite. It was sovereignty. I signed each document with a calm hand, not hurried, not angry. With every loop of my signature, I felt something settle in me, a quiet kind of reclamation, like I was stitching together the edges of a song he thought I'd stopped playing. He thought it was forgotten, but some melodies don't disappear. They wait. It came on a Thursday, just before noon. 2 men in polos and work boots wheeled it in like something holy. The legs were slimmer, the polish is smoother. The keys hadn't been touched enough to be tired yet. But it was mine. They placed it near the window, where the light pooled across the wood floor. I signed the delivery form with hands that trembled just slightly, less from nerves, more from something else. Something like relief. When they left, I sat on the bench and ran my fingers across the keys. It answered. Not loudly. Just enough. Welcome home, I whispered. This piano didn't carry our history. It carried my future. He stood in the doorway and stared like he didn't trust his own eyes. You bought a new one? The light from the window stretched toward him, soft and gold. The scent of polish still lingered. I didn't look away. I bought back my voice. His eyes dropped to the floor, then to the bench. He nodded once, slow and small, like something inside him deflated. He didn't argue, didn't ask about the cost, didn't ask who helped me pick it. He just looked tired. Not from the day, from the realization that something had shifted, and it wouldn't be shifting back. We sat in the same room. The walls hadn't changed, the clock still ticked. The window was open just a crack, letting in the wind, but everything felt different. He sat across from me, hands folded, eyes soft but uncertain. Why? Didn't you tell me? He asked. I met his eyes. Why didn't you? I replied. He didn't answer. We both knew there was no right reply. The air settled between us like an old blanket, worn, familiar, no longer warm. We were no longer a duet. Just 2 old melodies, once braided, now drifting in different tempos, still in the same house, but no longer in the same song. Didn't pack a bag, didn't slam a door, didn't leave. But something in me did. I let go of the version of us that had stopped listening, stopped looking, stopped asking. I stayed in the house, yes, but not in the life we'd been trying to. Salvaged like a leaky boat. I moved quietly into a new kind of living, stitched from soft mornings and solo choices. The teacup clinked against the saucer as I sat by the kitchen window, lace curtains glowing with early light. Dust floated in the air like it had nowhere else to be. Neither did I. We still crossed paths. We still said good morning, but I no longer waited for him to notice the weight in my silence. There's a difference between leaving a man and leaving the silence he built, and I chose to leave the silence. It started with 3 little girls on folding chairs, nervous fingers tapping at a keyboard that still smelled new. Then came the calls, retirement homes, church halls, Sunday socials. Each place echoed differently, some with laughter, some with memory, but all with room for a song to land. I stood in spaces I never thought I'd return to, my fingers brushing the keys like they still remembered. And they did. With every note, I felt something tighten in me, a thread pulling two sides back together, mending where I hadn't even realized I'd been torn. The applause was gentle, like rain tapping a window, but it reached me. It told me I wasn't done. I hadn't just been a woman who once played. I was still her. Still music. And my hands, slow, steady, held stories that hadn't yet been told. I sat alone at the piano that evening, the living room quiet except for the low hum of the lamp behind me. My fingers moved slowly, more deliberate now but steady. I played the waltz I'd written for our wedding night, the one I'd played barefoot, wrapped in lace and hope. The notes fell into the air like dust in a lamplight. Behind me, I heard him, Charles. He stood in the hallway, not saying a word. His shadow stretched long across the rug, reaching toward the edge of the bench, but stopping short. I didn't stop playing. When I finished, the silence wrapped around us both. He clapped. Once, a soft sound, but enough to crack something open. I didn't. "No, it meant that much," he said. His voice didn't carry weight that time. No pride, no sharpness, just a small sound, almost young. I sat still, hands resting in my lap. I didn't cry, didn't soften. I just nodded, not to make him feel better, but because the truth deserved space. I didn't need him to understand everything, just enough to see it had mattered. He still leaves coffee cups by the sink, still watch the news too loud, still hums when he doesn't think I'm listening. But he doesn't touch the piano anymore. He walks around it like it's sacred. Or maybe like it belongs to someone else now. I used to think silence meant peace. But I know better. Sometimes silence is what love sounds like when it's folding in on itself. Soft, unnoticed. Until one day, it's just gone. Now, I play for the girls with tangled hair and mismatched shoes, the ones who giggle when their fingers find the right note, who says, "This one sounds pink," or "That one feels like spinning." I play for them, and I play for myself. Because music was never supposed to be a performance. It was supposed to be permission, to feel, to cry, to belong. The piano keys are a little worn now, but they still hold room for joy. The classroom windows are open, and sunlight dances across the floor. Their laughter fills the air like a song just beginning. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm exactly where I belong. Thank you for sitting with me, dear heart. If you're 50 or older, I'd love to know, how old are you and where are you watching from? There's something sacred about the stories we carry. Yours matters just as much as mine. Subscribe for more of Grandma's Tales, and if someone ever took something from you without asking, something that meant more than they knew, tell me. What did you do with the quiet that followed? I'm listening, always.